Good day, I'm Lisa Pickering, and welcome to In the Know. Here we are in the Senate chamber of the Cabinet building to discuss the recently tabled referendum bill on same-sex unions. The government said that its aim is to extend the consultative process so that people of Bermuda can express their opinions on same-sex marriage and civil unions. The Referendum Act is expected to be debated in Parliament soon. Since the announcement, we have had considerable commentary from numerous groups and individuals in our community expressing their concern with government's decision to hold a referendum. Today, we are joined by the Premier, the Honourable Michael Dunkley, JP MP, and the Minister of Community, Culture and Sport, the Honourable Patricia Gordon-Pamplin, JP MP, to discuss the government's position and to gain some clarity on this very important matter. Premier, Minister, welcome.
Hi.
Thank you.
Nice to be here.
Now, before we get into the matter of the referendum, I should state that also recently the government tabled the draft Civil Union Bill 2016 for consultation in the House of Assembly. The aim of tabling the draft legislation is so that parliamentarians in the House of Assembly can have a consultative discussion on this issue. So, Minister Pamplin, let's begin with you. Why did we get to a point that we needed to draft this legislation, and how was the process?
Well, actually, from May of last year, having received a petition to ask that the government consider same-sex marriage and introducing legislation to that effect, it occurred to me that we needed to get some information. And we had the department set about looking to see how other jurisdictions had handled this matter, bearing in mind that prior to that, or just almost concomitant with that, was the Supreme Court of the United States decision, as well as around that same time the Irish referendum on same-sex marriage, both of which supported that state. So it was important to us to determine how other places who had that provision in their rules, how they got to where they were. So we had the necessary consultations done, we had the necessary research done, and then it occurred to me that we'd never had a discussion on the topic in the public arena, so we caused that to happen. And as a result, we were able to share the information that we had gathered from our consultations with the public. And we were able to hear back from them what their thoughts and ideas were concerning the topic. Subsequent to that, we opened a website so that people had the opportunity to express their concerns, their observations, their input, their recommendations to us. We had a significant number of submissions, all of which were evaluated, and we put them together to determine, based on categories of areas of concern. We put all those concerns together and came out with the items that were sort of on top of everybody's mind. And it occurred to us that we had people very harshly on one side of the argument saying absolutely no without any consideration. And we had people on the other side of the issue saying absolutely yes with no further input. But we had in between ideas that were coming across, things that we should be looking at and considering if we were going to go down that path. On the one hand, we had very serious concerns with respect to the religious community who wanted marriage to remain as defined in the law, which presently exists in the Matrimonial Causes Act, to state that marriage would remain between a man and a woman. And the people who were of that side of the argument were asking that we actually put some legislation in effect to give rise to that certification. On the other side of the argument, we started to hear about the human rights aspect of it. And as a result of that, we had to balance and weigh both sides of the issue in order to try to determine what was an appropriate response.
And in terms of Bermuda's international legal obligations under the European Convention on Human Rights, how do we stand? How do we fare?
Okay. Let me fast forward a little bit from those consultative sessions that we had with the public, of which there were 4. There had been a decision which was handed down in December, which was the Bermuda bread case. Right. And that case actually weighed very heavily in that decision on the precedent that had been established in the Oliari versus Italy case, which was one that had gone to the European courts. In that case, the Oliari decision effectively said that same-sex marriage was not a human right. However, that states were required to provide a framework within which same-sex couples could have their right to family life. So with that having been said, and looking at the Bermuda Bread decision that came down in our local courts, which was really a decision on an immigration issue, we recognized that something needed to be done in order that we had protections for both sides of the community, those with the issue on the positive and those with those issues on the negative, you know, in terms of their attitudes. So that was the manner in which we approached it. And, you know, the European Convention is very clear that we must provide a framework within which people have the right to family life. But in so doing, it also suggested that we must have a determination of the margin of appreciation of the people of the community in order to be able to make those changes.
And in terms of, you said some of the feedback was, in terms of negative feedback, was to do with religious beliefs. Is there room for religious beliefs in politics?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. Politics is a delicate balance. I think that we have to have a respect for all positions. The Human Rights Act itself, the preamble to the Human Rights Act basically speaks to the inalienable rights of everybody to have equal rights. So if we have to consider religion, then that's the right of a person who advances religion as their primary thought. We have to respect it. And those who don't, we have to respect that opposing position as well.
Now, Premier, in terms of the referendum bill, why did you decide to go down that route with same-sex unions? I mean, there's been talks about immigration policy, education, and cannabis reform as well, having referendums. Why did you decide that this was the avenue to take for same-sex unions?
That's a very good question. And let me answer it this way, in that this issue, no matter what jurisdiction it's been discussed, has been one of the most emotive issues and issues that communities have taken some time to find out the best way forward for that community. And I have to applaud my colleague and the team at the ministry for going out with a consultative approach. But it was clear to us that we still had a long way to go for people to understand what was facing us. We had the Supreme Court ruling, or we had to make decisions. And just like the greater public, within our caucus, we had people who had different views on this. And what we've tried to do is take our personal views aside and find a way forward where the community could have an input on how we went forward. And we saw it as soon as the consultative process started. Those who are for furthering rights were there with a petition early, and then the Preserved Marriage came with their petition after that. And we just thought as a team within our parliamentary caucus that it would be appropriate to have a referendum to gauge the views of the community to help make that decision making. And we'll all have a chance to talk about our personal beliefs and what we should do as we move forward. And this government has always said that we will listen to people, we'll try to understand the positions of people, but we support human rights. And so it was a very difficult decision because we realized that no matter how we made the decision or what we did, there would always be some kickback. But that's against the backdrop of no matter what you do, you'll always get some people who will disagree with you. And we're fine with that. We'll continue to discuss it with all the people in the community to find the best way forward. And we have to make a decision.
Now, have you had an opportunity to sit down with these groups? You said that they submitted petitions, Preserve Marriage, and then there's obviously the Human Rights Commission, and then the Rainbow Alliance, and other various groups out there. Have you actually had formal meetings with them?
We've been in constant communication. The minister and her team within that ministry, and also in Minister Faye, Ministry in Home Affairs, has met with groups. I've had the opportunity to be involved in some of those meetings. And before we went to the House and tabled the referendum bill, we talked to the Human Rights Commission and we explained the approach we were going to take. We believe that we wouldn't get universal support from them initially, but we hope we'll get support going forward because we do support human rights, but we're in a position where you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. And as a government, we have to make a decision rather than allow the courts to do what they had to do.
Now let's talk a little bit about the Constitution and Section 8. There has been talks that we may be breaching the Constitution if there is a referendum held regarding same-sex union?
I don't support that in any way. The individual or any other individuals are free to do what they want. We don't support that in any way.
Mr. Pamplin?
Well, I concur with the Premier's evaluation. I think that when people express their concerns about particular issues, it is an opinion that they might have, and if the opinion is not supported with the actual wording of the sections of the Human Rights Act, of the Constitution, I think that I take guidance on that from the Attorney General's chambers. I'm not an attorney by profession, so I'm quite happy to admit when I have shortcomings in my knowledge base, then I seek to have those shortcomings filled. So we don't believe that we are acting ultra vires the Constitution. I believe Section 8 effectively speaks to the fact that if a decision is being made based on pressure from religious groups or something, then it could be invalidated, words to that effect. And we don't think that that's been the reason why we've taken this stance. It's been one that we've had to look at. We made the determination, given the varying opinions that we had, that we would make this a free vote. And it was obvious that as a government, we couldn't just go to the House of Assembly and force through legislation. We don't want people to get on the Hill and to be effectively like lemmings, where they just kind of follow what's going on. And there are times when we have to permit that conscience vote. I have to say, though, that it's very disconcerting to me when I hear members, especially on the other team, indicate that they support full equality, but they would never support the Civil Union Act because it's too thorny a political issue. That I have a concern with. I think that, when people have a conscience about a particular issue, I would think that it's morally correct to vote your conscience if you have that opportunity, to vote your conscience and not to put the party politics before an issue that is so significant to our community.
Now, we talked about the criticism from some of the human rights groups and Rainbow Alliance. They also have suggested that you made a U-turn in your decision. They referenced that the AG had said that there would not be a referendum on this matter. What do you say to that?
No, I don't think that we've made a U-turn. I think what we've done is to further evaluate the information that we had in front of us. And I think that when we did the town hall meetings, we believed that by being able to table a civil union bill in the House of Assembly, we'd have the opportunity to look at it. And quite frankly, we believed that it would be able to garner sufficient support for it to pass. And in that way, you kind of satisfy almost both ends of the argument. We had an amendment that we put through in the House of Assembly to the Matrimonial Causes Act, in which Section 15, subsection 3, indicates that marriage is between a man and a woman. And we were further supporting that position by putting in another clause which effectively says that for the purposes of the fact that marriage is between a man and a woman, that section of the Matrimonial Causes Act would actually have primacy over the Human Rights Act. Now, that is not something that we take very lightly, but in so doing, we satisfy one side of the argument that says we want to be able to preserve marriage as it exists, as being between a man and a woman, and I believe that that amendment to Section 15 of the Matrimonial Causes Act does that. On the other side of the argument, you don't want to find yourself in a position of putting down legislation which satisfies one side of the issue and leaving everybody else with nothing. I think that's unfair, and I think that when we further look at the Oliari versus Italy and their recommendation that we have to get a margin of appreciation from our population, then I think that we didn't have much of an option to at least expose ourselves to the information that will come back as a result of how, to learn how people actually feel.
Premier?
Well, I don't think there's too much more to add than what the minister just said. I think I would like to reiterate in this position that in a very difficult issue like this, you have to try to get people to understand and pull people with you to make decisions. And the community wasn't ready to make decisions at that time. And we didn't believe it was appropriate just let the court do what they would do from there. And so that's why we're going through this process. I think it'll be a good educational process. I think from the time the minister and the team started the consultative process, it's been conducted in a very appropriate way, and I believe that will be the way going forward.
Now, the minister mentioned the Matrimonial Causes Act. If the vote is a yes, what does that mean? And can it possibly mean a general election is called?
No, you can't. No. You can't relate one with the other. There are two questions that will be asked. The first one will be, are you in favor of same-sex marriages in Bermuda? And the second question will be, are you in favor of same-sex civil unions in Bermuda? And you can answer yes or no to both, or to either, or to whatever you want. Those are the two questions. They have nothing to do with any other voting or any other intention. This shouldn't be along party lines or any group lines or anything like this. This is about what the community feels, what individuals feel, and I hope people are free to express themselves in an appropriate way without fear or intimidation. You know, I'm certainly comfortable for colleagues to talk about what they believe is appropriate going forward, and I think you'll see a lot of that over the coming couple of months.
And what would you say to those that argue that a majority is voting for a minority?
That's an interesting observation, but anytime you have a poll, people can make that question. This is a gauge of public opinion, and so we're going to be very careful because we respect all human rights, and so that will be very cognizant in the process as we go forward.
Minister?
I couldn't add anything more to that comment. I think that people, when they make such representations and ask the government to consider positions that ultimately may change life as we know it, we have an obligation to consider it very carefully, recognizing it's an extremely emotive subject. And I think that the best that we could do is to embrace people and to have further education process along the way. Hence, when I tabled the Civil Union Bill, it was a consultative draft. That would give members of Parliament to see the content of what a civil union would look like, what the terms and conditions that would be required to be met. And then we intend to do further information sessions, as we've already done, with the public, so that there's an in-depth understanding of the construct of civil unions. And I think that when people understand that if civil unions should pass, and we bring it into legislation, that the living of an individual's life does not negatively impact the community. I think that that is something that needs to be borne in mind. We have to look at if there is damage to the community at large. And I believe that our consultative process will at least have people understand the various steps that would be required. Some of the drawbacks of things such as, you know, I don't believe in this same-sex union, therefore I don't want to be forced that my church needs to marry, you know, a same-sex couple. And what's interesting is that that's allowed for in the civil union. That if, you know, that nobody can be forced because everybody has the freedom of their religion and nobody can impose a condition on one if one doesn't believe it. So that those freedoms have been shored up within the Civil Union Act.
In terms of civil unions, then, how does that affect the heterosexual community?
It doesn't.
It won't?
I can't imagine that it would. You know, heterosexuals can get married. They have the rights and privileges of and support and protections of the law in every issues in terms of, you know, whether one can, you know, the succession, if somebody should die, whether they die intestate, what the responsibilities are, and there are a manner of things. And all we're saying is to allow all people in Bermuda to have similar rights. So I think that if we continue down the path of education and take away some of the fear of the unknown by making the information available, I believe that people will at least have an appreciation for what it is that we're trying to do.
Now, Premier, there hasn't been a referendum since 1993. What are the next steps?
Well, the bill has passed the House of Assembly now, and once it passes the Senate, then I will set a date and the Parliamentary Register will kick in from there. So I urge everyone to go out and make sure you register to vote, because the registration to vote will close off quite quickly after that time. And if you're not on the registry at that time, then you won't be able to vote. And I would anticipate that the referendum will be set for some time towards the middle or end of June. Obviously, we have a holiday in June, so we want to keep it away from that a bit.
And in terms of price tag, it's been quoted in the paper that it's an estimated $350,000, I believe I read. What is the estimated cost?
It's about $300,000. We discussed it in the budget debate recently in the House under the parliamentary registry head, and fortunately there's funding in there that was otherwise allocated by the PR for by-election campaigns or general election campaigns, but we're not having a general election in 2016, so we can use some of that money. I think we will be able to do it relatively efficiently, because obviously everyone knows that the Parliamentary Register, they do a good job at running elections. They know how to get them done in an effective and appropriate way. We will probably end up having about 12 polling stations, but that'll be up to the PR. It's not necessary to have one in every constituency, so we can shorten up on some of the costs in that regard. If you have 12 polling stations, you'll probably have about 3,600 people voting in every area, and so that's an easy flow of traffic through.
And as I mentioned, over 20 years ago was the last referendum. What do you anticipate the voter outcome to be in terms of numbers?
It's a good question. I would hesitate in trying to guess, because I think any time communities have a right to go out and express themselves, they should do it in an appropriate way. So I'd hope we have a good, healthy turnout. In Bermuda, we always have healthy turnouts for events such as this. So I would urge people to come out and support the process. It's very important.
And I did reach out to the community just in terms of questions, and this one seemed to come up a couple times. I'll just read it. You accept that the European Court of Human Rights and the Supreme Court of Bermuda require the government to legally recognize same-sex relationships. What steps will you take to do so if there is a no vote?
Well, I think that we have to get to that point. We have to first go through the education process, and I am very confident that once people are familiar with and accept and appreciate that each person has an inalienable right to respect and to be treated fairly, then I believe that that eventuality hopefully doesn't happen. If it does, we will have to then go back to the drawing board, because I don't believe that we can, as a community, have a segment of our society that feels as though they are left on the fringes. I don't believe that's fair.
So what would you say to those that are struggling right now in terms of in relationships, same-sex relationships, that are looking for a positive outcome?
Get involved. Get involved. Get the community to understand what it's all about. And I think that people will look at it in an appropriate way. Communities throughout the world have gotten involved. Some have taken longer to accept it and change. Look, I'm not one to judge people on how they act, as long as they're conforming to our laws. And everyone lives their life differently, and the world has changed through the years. And I think we have always in Bermuda been very respectful of human rights. We've seen a tremendous amount of progress over the last 40 years, in my adult life, and I think we'll continue to see that. I think we'll see people from all walks of life come out and say what's going on. The stories that I've heard from family members that I wasn't aware of how they were discriminated against, and they had to hide that type of stuff. That's not acceptable. You go in other places of the world and you see how people are treated. People don't worry about these type of things. Sometimes we just have to respect other people, be tolerant of other people, and allow our society to continue to move forward. And this process, I hope, will dispel some of the fears that individuals might have or groups might have. And it doesn't mean you have to change what you believe is right. I think it's just about respecting human rights. And Bermuda's been very good at that over the last 40 years. So I'm hopeful we'll continue to do it. I've been very clear on what I feel. I've been married 35 years. I support the institution of marriage, but I'm not going to discriminate against anyone. And I clearly support civil unions. And so we have to make a decision, or we allow courts to decide. And that's not appropriate. That's definitely not an appropriate way to go. So people should listen, discuss it, in an appropriate, respectful way, and we'll come to a very good decision.
Mr. Premier, thank you so much for your time today. Any closing thoughts?
Well, all I can say is that we will be setting up a series of informational sessions, and we would invite people to come out as much as they possibly can. We would invite them to share with us their ideas so that if there are fears, that they can be dispelled. If there is support, we can help to embrace it, and that we can work together as a community to uphold one another as opposed to being critical and tearing one another down.
Well, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Lisa.
And thank you for joining us. Join us next time right here on In the Know on CITV. I'm Lisa Pickering.